All right, hello everyone, and welcome. It is Tuesday, March 6th, and we've made it to week 2 here. You've just completed your first round of assignments, or a composition for 2D platformer. Our first game of the month. You did the music and the sound effects. And so this Tuesday session is going to be like the rest of our Tuesdays, where we will start out with a review of the submitted projects. So I have 4 submissions to check out today. And then we will get into the new assignments for week 2. Switching back over here, we'll start talking about your second game of the month, called Angry Bots, which requires a new style of music, a new approach to how that music is going to work in the game, and a new instrumentation, a new setup of everything. So a different approach overall, and will give us insight to how different types of games might use music differently. So we will. So you've worked on the music and sound effects for your first game. Now you'll work on music and sound effects for your second game, and then week 3 we will take all of your music and sound effects and use a program called Wise to implement your music so that it plays back, and your sound effects, so that they play back correctly when when somebody plays the game. So we'll talk about the technology. We'll talk about the process of what happens to your WAV files to actually get them working in the game. So that is what we have in store for this session. Let me switch back over here. Like I said, we have 4 submissions. You've just completed the music for 2D platformer. The focus or how the music is going to play back in the game is centered around the idea of an intro, a loop or a series of loops, and an ending. And so you have 9 files. Each student has 9 regions or 9 files on one track. Each student has their own submission on a single track. And the way that I have this split out is these are all of the main loops. You can see they're a little bit longer overall. These are all of the intros. They should be 2 bars, like these ones up here. And these are all of the endings. And so we'll start by listening to the main loops, and then that will inform us a lot of how the intros and endings should sound. So I'll start out here just kind of explaining overall what we're listening for and what we should expect. And then we'll go through one by one, paying attention to kind of the individual details. So, like I said, we'll start over here with the main loops. First and foremost, the main loops need to loop. They need to seamlessly transition from the end of the file back to the top with no gaps or pops or clicks or fades. So watch out for waveforms that kind of look like this with the tail on the end that goes to silence. Sometimes, especially when they're all basically the same length, what can happen is when you bounce a particular file, you have include audio tail turned on. And that is going to, not artificially, but extend the length of the recording, extend the length of the file to include any sort of reverb or tail or instrument decay. And that can be helpful sometimes, especially in like just a song form, when you want to make sure you don't get anything cut off. But when the files need to loop, this is going to create silence at the end. So you want to avoid using include audio tail More than likely, they look like they are 8 bars or the same number of bars, and they will probably loop correctly if you just edit them down into the loops or just bounce them over again. But these files look like they are set up ready to loop. All of these files look like they're set up and ready to loop. The other thing that we pay attention to is the mix, and you want to make sure that you have a consistent mix across all 3 of these files. No one whole file sticks out, and it looks like they all have the same mix. Obviously, the final mix of this versus the final mix is different, but it's fine as long as they're consistent amongst themselves. So a consistent mix. Then we are obviously paying attention to the composition. They're going to need to be in the same key. They're going to need to be in the same tempo. To make this work, they are going to need the same instrumentation. So there's a couple of things that need to be the same overall to make them sound consistent. But the thing that's going to make them the most different is the compositional aspect of it, which is your choice of drums or percussion, your bass, your harmony, your melody, and changes in development from one to the next. So we want to avoid repetition. We watch out for that. You want to make sure that most likely you are going to use your melody to create most of the development and change. So a strong melody, a strong harmony to support it, a bass line and rhythm to kind of drive the rhythm and the pacing of the music forward. Yeah, that's kind of what we're focused on in the main loops. Then the intros. The intros are going to need to build and rise into the main loops. Wherever you start at the beginning of any one of these main loops, that's basically where you want to end at any one of the intros, so that they will seamlessly connect, seamlessly transition, and you need to make sure that intro 1 works with main loop 1, 2, and 3. Intro 2 works with main loop 1, 2, and 3. Basically all of the different combinations that can happen. So you need to make sure that they extend all the way to the end of the file. Again, since these have the silence at the end, I'm going to say that they probably included the audio tail, but as long as they rise up towards the main loops, they need to build intensity. They should not be able to loop, meaning that typically an intro will have a dynamic shape that rises. You will have less intensity, you will have less instrumentation at the beginning, and very quickly in 2 bars, it will rise up to the pacing of a main loop. So they should not really be able to loop. You can set them up to loop. You could set one of these to have the marquee set up to go around and around, but they shouldn't really sound correct. They would build and rise and then fall back down, and rise and fall back down. So anything that is consistent dynamically and does not sort of rise in that action or intensity, then it's not going to really work too well as an intro. These 3 down here are too long. They seem to be the same length as the main loops, so I'm going to guess that these are also 8 bars. So cut them down. I mean, I don't think it's going to be as simple as just doing something like that, but make sure that you don't create them as full loops or full 8-bar regions. Same thing with these 3 endings. The endings are going to end. They need to resolve to silence. The shape of these work very well. Shape of these work well, although this one might get cut off just a little bit at the end. But these will get cut off. This one looks good. And then, yeah, these will just get cut off whenever the file is done. You also want to watch out for endings that are too long, because when the game is over, when your character falls into the sludge down below, and then respawns back at the top to start the match over is about 4 seconds. You can actually, it should be the same every single time, so you could actually count it. And dependent on your tempo, the BPM of your music will affect how long the file is, and you don't, that's why, another reason, you don't want music that's too slow, or else the endings will start overlapping with the intros. So, something to pay attention to. And what else? The intros and endings. We want to make sure that you use consistent instrumentation. Whatever the instrumentation is in the main loops should also be present in the intros and endings. The endings, you also have a little bit more opportunity to do some weird stuff because you just lost in the game. So you might... I've heard things where the band falls apart, or the pitch slows down, or pitch or tempo slows down. It gets hit with a whole bunch of effects. There's all sorts of different directions. Everything's in major, and it hits some minor chord or diminished chord, or some very dissonant final note or interval or chord or whatever it is. All right. Hopefully that gives us some insight in how these might work. So let's go ahead and start with our first one. And let's see. I'll zoom in here so we can see what we're doing. All right, 3 main loops. Delay works. All right, very cool. So, lots of interesting stuff going on there. I think that the pacing and the energy overall works well for the game. I think that I like the change in the lead line, the lead instrument, from one to the next. Like we have that synth, then we have... Well, it's not that different there. Then we add this kind of distorted low bass, or low synth. I thought that was something I was paying attention to more. Oh, well, that would be another thing to point out, would be whatever is the lead instrument should have the biggest kind of spotlight on it, be the most forward in the mix. The other thing would be with the instrument in this cue, the extra low distorted bass should be present in some way through the other cues, even if it's mixed pretty far down. Maybe it is. I don't. Maybe it's really filtered or something. But it should be present so it's not such a big jump. It also depends on what you did with your intros and your endings. And then the drums. All right, I think there's some rhythmic changes from one to the next. So yeah, there's some definitely some good stuff. Good instrumentation overall. Good pace. Make sure that they are set up to loop. Focus on the main or lead instrument on each one of them, and make sure. Let's see what you did with the intros here for the instrumentation. I like the third one. I think 1 and 2 sound a little too similar. Yeah. So just a little bit more variation through there. I think the lead instrument is a lot more present, sort of that idea where it's more in focus or more in front of the mix. Maybe it's just because it's an octave up. Once it gets it over here, yeah, once it goes here, it drops an octave lower, and it becomes kind of farther down in the mix. So it might help to, yeah, keep it that octave and sort of maintain that tone. 3 endings. Yeah, same thing here. It's much more present. And you should use that same energy too in 3 endings. Oh, and something else that I noticed, especially while I'm sitting here with only one side on. That's what it is. I don't have the right side on. Okay. So watch out for anything that's hard panned in the mix. It may not come through in the live broadcast, but it should show up in the archive where it's a stereo recording and it's just hard panned to the right. It certainly depends on what your final game system is going to be. If it's a mobile game that doesn't really have stereo, or 99% of the time they're not going to be listening in stereo. I guess people listen on earbuds quite a bit, but they might just miss a whole portion of your mix. So it needs to be, I mean, typically leads are often straight up down the center or moving around a little bit, but it shouldn't just be panned hard right. Have a little something over in the left channel. Right. Endings work. And yeah, just use the same sort of energy from that lead that you have in the intros and endings through the main loops. All right, very good. Good stuff to start with. Let's try next one. Very cool. I like the live recorded guitar. Live instrumentation always helps liven up the mix. And I think that I like the lead idea on each one of them. Maybe you... let's see. I was going to say maybe you should try a couple of riffs, but this is more like a riff than a lead line. You got a little... kind of a solo thing there at the end. But the main thing overall I would say is the mix. Everything sounds quite dull and kind of far off or at a distance. Maybe it's the reverb, maybe it's the EQ. There's a lot of mud in the low mid-range. So just filtering the heck out of everything. Doubling guitars, splitting them left and right. Let's see, it's also quite mono. So take your rhythm guitars and just double them up and use different guitar tones on every single one of them. We probably have access to Guitar Rig. take your recorded guitar, if you have an amped guitar, and just do a couple passes, layer them up, and pan those out. Keep your solo straight up and down the middle. Use low-cut filters on everything so that you kind of clean up the low end. But compositionally, what you have certainly works. I think there's some other instruments that I'm missing kind of below. I hear the drums. I hear the rhythm guitar, the lead guitar. I think there's a piano in there. There's something just kind of hitting on the chord changes. So, yeah, just kind of carving different areas for the mix overall. Let's do intros and endings. So I would try for a little bit more build-up in the second bar of each one of these. Starting with the drums, the drum pattern that's used is pretty consistent, as opposed to maybe not having drums or just having hi-hat or something very just very minimal in the first bar, and then it builds up with a big snare roll or tom roll. You have a little bit of a roll in like the last beat of each one of these, but kind of build it up a little bit more through the second bar of each one of these, and don't rely on the kind of the pattern kind of repetition through the first bar or so. And then on the guitar in the second two, you kind of you hit this last chord and you sustain through the second bar of the intro. The first one, but you hit two chords in the second bar there. But basically use the second bar to build up. Guitars build up, drums roll, and everything builds up to go into the main loops. Everything should be kind of shaped like this ending 3, where it actually ends before the end of the file. But let's take a listen to all of them. Right. Oops. So this is correct. You should, with the instrumentation that you have and the composition, should probably be best to end on beat 1 of bar 2, like you did in ending 3. Then it just sustains, and it has enough room to actually end. If you need to, you can extend the length of the endings out beyond the 2 bars. So the music says that it needs to end in 2 bars, and so you can actually end the music a little bit early, as long as everything is done. Well, as long as the music is done within 2 bars. Then, if you need a little bit of room for instrument decay, reverb, fade outs, whatever, you can have the file extend beyond 2 bars as long as the music's done within the 2 bars. So this is actually probably would work best. The last half of the bar in these endings is just the drums continue to play like this one, da, 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 chord, and it just hits on beat 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, and you don't need the little drums at the end there. Ending 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2. And you just kind of hit there and let it sustain and fade out like this. 2, 3, 4, 2. And it ends. Cool. All right. So, brighten up the mix, layer some more guitars in there, pan them all out, build through the intros, and end the endings. Yeah. All right. Very good. Let's try the next one here. Oh, goodness. Turn it down. There it is. And 3 main loops. All right, so good stuff here. The instrumentation, the intensity, all works well for the kind of feel and the vibe of the game. The melody is strong and certainly changes and develops. I think that with that sort of development, you can rely on more of a steady rhythm. The rhythm does change up in the third cue. One thing that I typically warn against, I don't know about against, warn about, would be the kind of halftime feel in one of the cues. And really, there's no strong way to tell until you get it into the game. But you typically don't want a strong signpost or real obvious change from one cue to the next. Now, musically, it certainly fits. The only question would be, how often is it triggered? Does it get in the way? Often it's perfectly fine, and that's kind of why it's there, is to provide that change. But since it is completely random in the game, it's not always going to come in some pre-scripted logical way. So, so if you're okay with it playing 3 times in a row and then 2 other things playing and then it plays again 4 times in a row, that might be all right. And so it's certainly something to check out. But compositionally, production-wise, I think everything fits. I think the strong instrumentation and progression and lead certainly drives the piece nicely. 3 intros. All right, so the synth does kind of maybe rise or fall, and could be probably used in an intro, but it really needs to be supported by the drums, especially the snare. The snare's got a little bit going on in the intro cue, but a lot of the percussion seems to be missing through the intros. There's some a kick drum in there. But definitely in the second bar, just have everything, probably just a straight ahead snare roll would work just fine to kind of build up that energy so that it works directly when you hit this. And that kind of constant rhythm. So a little bit more energy through the intros. And endings, watch out for this middle one that's going to get cut off. Cool. So the synth works. Definitely here you can it's just the nice delay that's on the end that kind of overlaps there. But definitely needs some drums. only probably in the first bar. You probably have a kick or maybe a cymbal crash on the first ones, the first beat of each one, but the drummer just kind of falls out of the mix very quickly when these hit. So have just a half a bar, a full bar of the drums, and they hit a final crash cymbal or one final hit, and then everything's done. So just a couple of tweaks on each one of those, but I think you definitely got some good ideas and good stuff to work with. And, oh yeah, I'm going to pull these back. Oops. Oh no. That'll work. Okay, so I'm going to guess that these are just 8-bar loops. Okay, so let's do the main loops first. Alright, so it needs probably some stronger percussion throughout, a stronger drum pattern that's constantly going, and you have the snare, I know in the third one. Where does it go in the second one? Alright, so you got the clap in the second one. Just needs stronger percussion consistently throughout. The next thing would be watch out for the repetition. You basically, it's a 2-bar loop that goes around. There's some slight changes in there, but it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, then it repeats. 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, repeats. Strong melody will create that development. Watch out for repetitious phrasing. Basically the same repeated phrase going around. Even at the end, it might go up a note or down a note. Just watch out for this. And then you get the snare in there. Snare helps bring it up. Add hi-hat, add more percussion. All of these things will create more energy through the cues. And then change the chord progression. Whatever you state kind of in the first half, do not repeat in the second half of each one of those cues. 3 intros. Going to build towards the end. Alright, so create that rise, create that build, edit them down to 2 bars, and make sure that they kind of build into whatever's going on in the main loops. There you go, now you got a hi-hat, now you got a more activity in the percussion. So it sounds like you might have some elements that you can use in these other cues towards the main loops to create that melody, to add more percussion, more energy in each one of them, and then you'll need to repurpose the intros and endings to rise and fall in and out of those main loops. All right, so we've got 4 different submissions, some good things to talk about. I always find that it is good for the individual because obviously we're going through their submission. We can talk about it. I can point out different aspects of it. but I also find it very beneficial for everybody else. So yes, you see your own submission, but you also see the submissions of three other folks, and you get to get an idea of the good things, the bad things, what works, what doesn't work, see different variations on the same idea, and hopefully it kind of inspires you to head in maybe um, uh, change the direction that you're headed in the mix in the composition, and sort of apply it to your project overall. So you will receive individual feedback also for everybody, as I'll post up and do all the grades and all that sort of stuff. So that will be coming up. But if you have any questions on the projects, either on 2D Platformer or on your new assignment for this week, please let me know. Send me a message, and we can discuss any aspect that you need about the project. So, excuse me. So that is generally going to be our flow for the rest of our Tuesday sessions, where we will listen to the previous week's submissions. I certainly hope that this encourages more people to submit for next round. Typically what happens is people might have some reservations in the first time around, but then we'll see the first round of peer review, and hopefully that gets you to submit for the upcoming ones for week 2 and week 3. So, if you have any questions on the assignments, please let me know. But right now, we're going to turn it over to the archive to discuss the new assignments for week 2. Thank you very much. Thanks. Let's discuss your project for this week. Our new game called Angry Bots. So as I mentioned, where'd it go? Hopefully you took the opportunity to download this week's game. Maybe you have played it and taken a chance to get a sense of what the game's about. Maybe took a look through the documentation. But a new game this week requires a new style of music and a new music soundtrack and new sound effects. Now that you've gone through the process once, you basically have the structure or the schedule for everything, and we're going to follow very much the same flow for Angry Bots, where this week you'll do the composition, next week you'll do all of the sound design, and you'll put it into the game and create a video capture. So this game, again, is called Angry Bots. It is made by Unity Games using the Unity game engine. We'll talk a bit more about that this week as we dive into some of the technology of getting your music to work actually in the game. And the Unity game engine is a very popular tool to make all sorts of different types of games. If you play a lot of mobile games, iOS and Android games, then more than likely you've played something that's been built on the Unity game engine. And Angry Bots here is a kind of a game demo where not only is it a game, but you can actually get access to all of the art and the music and the sound and the code and the program, like all the pieces of it. And so the people that were learning art can tear it apart on that side, and the people that are learning code and programming can tear apart a game project like this from that point of view. And we over here on the music and sound team are going to reference it and use it as a demo for showing off our music and sound. So this type of game, it's a much number one, it's a much more full and complete game. It does actually take like 5 or 10 minutes to get through from beginning to end. It does actually have an end. It is what might be considered like a complete game level of a much larger game. It is kind of certainly a darker and grittier style overall. It's modern and kind of futuristic, much a much more intense feel than 2D platformer from last round. It is having this sort of modern approach to the game, or kind of futuristic feel. You are this mercenary who's infiltrating the robot factory, and the robots are certainly not happy that you're there, and so they are there to take you out, and you're going to battle your way deeper and deeper into this factory. So there are battles that are constantly happening, and that's one of the main thing. Well, that is the main thing that we are directing our music from. The main musical idea that we're focused on in this composition is the idea of ambient and action. Our music is going to need to transition smoothly between ambient gameplay and action gameplay, where ambient doesn't refer, like, it's not a room tone or rain or anything. It's not like a sound effect ambience. It also doesn't mean the genre of ambient music, meaning that it's just like slow and drone and boring and doesn't move or change. Ambient just means less than action. There's no battle going on at that point. So this is often referred to as battle and exploration. So during exploration, you're just kind of wandering around. There's no bad guys around. All of a sudden, a robot jumps out or a bad guy jumps out, and the action music kicks in. And we have to be able to switch musically, seamlessly back and forth between a lower intensity ambient game state and a higher intensity action game state. Question here in the chat. Do you think a minor key signature would be appropriate for this game? Absolutely. For this, you're going for intense and battles and firefights and robots and explosions and heroic and adventure and all of these big and intense ideas. It's a lot easier to get away with that in a minor key. Even with some kind of diminished tonality to it, where it you can get that intensity and that tension from a minor key, versus with a major key, it's going to be sometimes what I'll get in the music is it's like too laid back and chill or happy. That's the problem with a major key in this instance. Unless you're going for strictly heroic and I've already won and beat the game, then a major key works can work a bit better. But sometimes what I get is, hey, maybe the robots aren't so bad with this music, or I get like happy dance party with the music, where it's upbeat and like a strong dance beat, but it's still like not too dark and intense, and like you have to imagine that these robots are chasing you with lasers and rocket launchers, and they are really mad that you're there, and certainly you're there to defeat them, and nobody's happy about it. So you want to avoid anything that's too slow or laid back or easy or happy or too silly or anything like that. You want to make sure that you're going for that tension, that intensity, that aggressiveness, that action feel as you go back and forth. So let me switch over real quick to the PDF. Where is that? When you not only do you get the video here and the game, you get a PDF that looks like this. And let me go through a couple of things, and I'll talk about the actual WAV files and the delivery and like what you're actually creating here. Game overview. It's going to talk a lot about ambient and action. This is really a summary of everything that I'm talking about here, where, and this is a very common approach in games. Angry Bots is known as a third-person shooter, which means most of the game you're battling some evil bad guy, and you've got either a laser or a machine. In this case, you're equipped with like a machine gun, and you are constantly going back and forth between moving through the level and actually engaging and battling with an enemy. Very, very common approach in games, and this is a challenge that a lot of games and a lot of game composers encounter. I have to quickly and musically go back and forth between lower intensity and higher intensity, and I have no clue when it's going to happen. So what we do is we create music at lower intensity and higher intensities, and we figure out a way to transition back and forth. So, and we'll talk about how that is going to work. How to play. Maybe you've already gotten a chance to play the game. Definitely take the chance, play the game, get a sense or a feel of it. If you're familiar with mouse and keyboard gaming, then W, A, S, and D work, or you can use the arrow keys to move forward, back, left, and right. The mouse aims, and left click fires the weapon. Reference listening. There's a couple of different game soundtracks to reference in this sort of style. Musical style, high-end energy, over-the-top music production style, like fast electronic or epic metal. Big, loud, strong, intense music styles definitely help this composition, this project. So rock, metal, electronic, heavy orchestral, that type of instrumentation will work. Synths, large pads, driving bass lines, gated effects, sweeping filters, bouncing delays, fast percussion, heavy distorted guitars, big fast drums, large brass and strings, cymbal swells. All of those are just big, loud, strong, impactful instruments. So that is the main theme, the main aesthetic that we're going for. Music system, more about ambient and action, and I'll take you on a play-by-play here in a little bit. And also I got some examples to show off with screenshots and a bit of information about each one of the cues. And here at the asset list. All right, so ultimately what you will be delivering are 7 audio files, and they are an ambient loop that is going to be over a minute long. All of these are going to be 16-bit 44.1 stereo files. Ambient loop, then 3 action loops. They're each going to be 8 bars. The ambient loop is heard when you are not battling with one of the robots. The action cues are heard when you are battling with one of the robots. And there are 3 different types of robots. Each gets their own individual action theme. Those action themes are only 8 bars. You might have noticed in the video that the battles are really quite short. You don't have to, it doesn't really take all that long to actually defeat one of these robots. So you want to make sure that the music doesn't constantly jump in and jump out and on and off. So we have to, we'll have to address that aspect of it. But the 8 bars, most of the battles are not going to even make it through 8 bars of music. Or even if it just loops one time, that'll take up most of the battles. So beyond, these are the main 4 pieces of music that's mostly going to be heard. Music stingers. The stingers are there. Notice that they're really short, only 1 to 3 seconds, and they are strong, sharp impacts that are meant to hide the transition between ambient and action. So let me take a moment here. Let me go back to the video and give you the play-by-play of how this is going to work. Actually, let me take one quick pause here before we get into this and let the video roll. Let me know if you have any questions so far. Okay. Let me back this up here. So, I'm going to start talking about the ambient and the action cues first. We have one ambient cue that is a minute long. It's the longest file because it's going to be heard most often. Then your 3 action cues, those are each 8 bars long, and those happen when the battles happen. So let's talk about how the game knows how to switch back and forth between these pieces of music. If nothing else is happening, and from the start of the game, you hear the ambient cue. If the player just finds a corner and just stands there forever, they are going to hear that ambient cue. Here in the chat, how long can we go on in the ambient with the ambient music? The cue is supposed to be 1 minute to 2 minutes long. I have some examples, and I'll kind of discuss more of the content and what they might sound like here in a bit. The ambient, so if nothing else is happening, they're going to hear that ambient cue. So that's why it's so long. If they just stand around doing nothing, it's just going to keep going around and around. So then, how does the game know when to switch to action? And then how does the game know when to switch back to ambient? And we said that the action music is heard during the battles. So then how does the game know when the battles are happening? So let's go through this. So the ambient cue plays. This robot here is called the buzzer bot. And it's kind of like flies around, and it's meant to be like annoying, I think, and zaps you. It has this laser, like a lightning bolt that comes out, shoots out right there, and zaps you, and just kind of flies around. It doesn't take much to defeat it, and it would just kind of keep flying around and keep zapping you. So this is a battle, right? As soon as it zaps you and you fire it at it, there's some battle going on, so we need to have the game know that that's happening. So the real answer here is that the game uses health points in the game to determine when the battles start and stop. So your character has health points, and the enemy robot has health points. You have a whole lot more health points than any one robot. So it takes a lot of hits on you constantly all the way through the level to do much damage. But for a robot, it really doesn't have much damage or much health points, so it doesn't take all that much to defeat it. So as soon as somebody loses health points, the game is going to switch from ambient to action. So the game always knows which characters are on screen. It knows which robots are there, and it knows where your character is. So as soon as somebody takes damage, as soon as you get zapped here, the game says, oh, the main player has taken damage, so that must mean the battle has started. So we are going to switch from ambient over to action. And this happens immediately. It hard cuts from one to the next. And you are not guaranteed in where you are going to be in the ambient queue when this switch happens. So it's just going to hard cut from one to the next. And that works because you're in battle now. You just lost health points. You just took damage. All right, now it's on. We're going to battle for a little bit. And then somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose, and the music will have to shift. So from the beginning of the game, the ambient cue is playing until somebody takes damage, and at that point, the action music starts. And then until at some point, somebody is at 0 health, either your character, but more than likely it's one of the robots. So that robot now goes to 0 health, and the game knows that the battle is over. So it doesn't immediately hard cut back to the ambient queue. It's it's a strong change in intensity. Going from lower intensity ambient music to higher intensity action music works because it's kind of like when your friend jumps out around the corner and scares you, your heartbeat kind of just skyrockets. It like jumps up real quick and it's pounding suddenly, and your natural reaction is that your heartbeat can jump up very, very quickly. So the pace of the music can jump up quickly because now the battle has started. But when your friend jumps out and you realize, oh, it's just your friend and there's no danger, well, your heartbeat doesn't just drop back to where it was. You have to breathe a little bit and calm yourself down, and it returns back to where it was. So we're going to do the same thing with the music. Going from ambient into action, from lower intensity to higher intensity, we're just going to make a sudden jump up. But when the battle is over and you're going from high intensity to low intensity music, we're going to slowly crossfade over 3 seconds to return it back down to normal before the next battle starts. So ambient music is heard. Zap, now the action music instantly hard cuts. Battle is now over, and it crossfades out for 3 seconds. Next one. These are called spider bots, and they're basically like bombs on legs. They jump awake there, and they chase you. They don't have any attack until they get close enough, and then they just kind of explode. So, same sort of thing here. When these guys jump awake like that, they kind of light up. You can see here, this guy jumps, just kind of like pops up. Then the action music immediately starts. With these guys, the battle music or the action music starts when they turn on or they wake up. So this spider action cue plays 8 bars. It loops around and around. Here it would probably play a little longer because I kind of just toy with it and dance around. But eventually, either you destroy it or it gets close enough and it self-destructs. So here's another one. As soon as this jumps awake, the spider action music would start. The battle goes until it's over, and then after 3 seconds, it fades back to the ambient cue. And then as the player progresses through and explores through the level, they're going to hear the ambient cue until the next robot, as this guy jumps awake, then it switches to the spider music instantly, battle's over, and over 3 seconds it fades back. This robot is called the mech bot, coming down the hallway here. It's sort of like a boss battle. A little bit more. It takes a little bit more to beat these guys. They're bigger and slower, and they cause more damage. So typically, this is going to be the biggest, strongest part of your composition. These guys are going to be big and have big percussion and drums and strong bass lines and loud, rhythmic, powerful music. With this composition, you can have more variation in the instruments than you did in 2D platformer. When we talked about 2D platformer, we said that all of the cues need to have similar instrumentation so that it seems consistent and almost invisible as it jumps from one to the next. With this one, you should have more change and variation in the instruments that you choose from your spider action cue and your buzzer action cue and your mech action cue. You should have instrumentation that represents each one of these robots. So even if it's not on screen yet, you still can hear it and you know which one's coming for you. So your choice of instruments will match the overall approach or style of that particular robot. So let's listen to some examples here. And I will also talk about the stingers. All right, let's see if this works. So what I have here, these are 4 student submissions. This first column over here are ambient cues. They're about a minute long, minute to 2 minutes, and they are set up or meant to loop. Over here I have action cues. These are each 8 bars long, and each cue represents its own robot. So the instruments and the melodic theme and the rhythms should sort of reflect the feel of that particular robot coming after you. And over here, these are stingers. I'm going to talk a bit more about these as we listen to them and figure out what their use is. So we'll start here with the first ambient cue. So it starts out as just a kind of a pad or a drone, which it shouldn't just be a pad or drone all the way through. There needs to be a bit of rhythm, maybe even a melodic theme or idea, and there needs to be change in the instrumentation. Here comes a strong change. So sometimes I discuss the ambient cue could be thought of more like musical sound design. There is a couple of ways to approach it. You could go with something that is more traditional composition, where you have drums, bass, harmony, and melody, and use and develop those ideas over the minute cue. Or you could use it as more texture and tones, taking more of a musical sound design approach. So it is using musical instruments, using synths, using effects and processing to create more of an interesting soundscape overall that might include, or probably should include, a bit of rhythm. Do you have having a little bit of percussion or rhythm in there foreshadows the pace that you have coming up in the action cues. So change and development, one of the biggest things that I find when grading these is that the instrumentation, once it's established in the ambient cue, doesn't really change all that much. So you want to make sure that you have variation and development over the course of the cue. With the action loops, or the action cues, these are set up to loop. They are 8 bars. They need to be strong and intense. One of the main things we're listening for compositionally is making sure that the action cues are the loudest and strongest portion of your mix. However big and loud and strong you make the ambient cue, your action cues just need to be even bigger and louder and stronger. So typically full drum kit or strong kick snare pattern, a memorable lead that is recognizable for that particular robot, powerful bass lines. Intensity is the main thing that we're listening for. So here are, we have one 8-bar cue for the buzzer cue, we have one for the mech, and we have one for spider. Set up to loop. There should be some variation and difference between the first 4 bars and the second 4 bars. You'll hear this mech cue has different instrumentation. Kind of represents a different feel for the cue. Third one here, spider. So you can hear that each one has its own rhythm. It has its own melodic and harmonic and strong bass instrumentation. So these are going to create a particular voice or theme for that robot. And making sure as we go back and forth, you are probably best to maintain a similar key as you switch back and forth between the ambient and all three action cues. That way there isn't a strong harmonic jump between the two cues, especially as you're kind of going back and forth pretty quickly. You typically want to maintain a similar tempo through all of the cues, but use double time and half time to create variations in the rhythm. So in your action cues, let's see, this buzzer cue is more of what I would consider the base tempo of everything. Then the mech has more of a halftime feel because it's a bigger robot, stronger, kind of lumbering around. Well, they're actually at a similar tempo and feel, but they both have a halftime feel. Then with the spider cue, it's got more of a double time feel. Sitting on those eighth notes because it kind of matches like the skittering feet of the spider bot as it roams the level. So using things like halftime and double time can definitely help create the intensity change as you move back and forth. In the chat here, I would like to create more of a soundscape for the ambient cue, but I'm not very good at composing electronic music styles. Do you think there's a way to go between electronic sounds for the ambience and orchestral for the action? I might actually go for orchestral for the ambient because you have more time to develop melodic and harmonic ideas, and then with the action cues, since they're short and meant to be much more intense and a little bit kind of techy and robotic, switching over to action for those, especially since you may not feel as comfortable with the action or with the electronic side of things. So yeah, the answer is yes. You can go, well, I wouldn't say entirely go back and forth. Probably a better way of approaching is, let's say you do most kind of more of an electronic feel for the ambient cue. Have some strain of orchestral instrument, maybe a cello or some brass risers or something in the ambient cue that's then much more focused in the action cue, and the same both ways. So whichever order you choose the different genres, then have an instrument or a layer of each one of them in the other ones so that it's not just such a strong difference between them. So all right. Yeah, I would think those would be good approaches for that. Now, I want to talk about the stinger cues and their use here. Two issues with how the music is going to switch by itself. As I mentioned, when we go from ambient to action, it is a hard cut. So I'm going to fake all of this and set this up in Logic here. So let's say we were rolling through our ambient cue, and then a buzzer bot came out to attack, and we are going to hard cut from one to the next. Let me just make sure that that's somewhat lined up. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. You know what? I'm just going to do it all on the same track. So I'm going to just drag these around. It's going to hard cut from ambient over to action. And then when action is done, it is going to crossfade back into ambient. So let me create a crossfade here. Something like that. Now the game, of course, is going to do this way better than I am, just clicking around here in Logic. But general idea is ambient loop plays, buzzer bot jumps. The battle starts with the buzzer bot. It hard cuts from one to the next. You beat the buzzer bot. It crossfades out over 3 seconds and fades in over 3 seconds back to the ambient loop. I have no idea if that's actually 3 seconds, but hopefully we can get the idea here. So I think here's the ambient cue. And it's going to hard cut over to the buzzer. And the battle's over, and it's going to crossfade back to ambient. And goes back to ambient and allows the whole process to start all over again. So one thing you might notice is that change and transition in the buzzer cue is very sudden. And so having some instrumentation of the ambient cue also present in the action cues helps that transition a little bit. But the stingers also help that quite a bit. So the stingers are going to sit here. Go off the fade tool. They're going to sit right, oh my goodness, I lost it. Right where the action cue comes in. And they are there to help this transition so that it isn't so sudden. It kind of takes attention, distracts, and says, hey, look over here, listen to this real quick while I switch from one to the next. And it also provides randomness and variation. Every time you battle one of the buzzer bots, you are going to hear that exact same buzzer bot action cue. But each time it's going to randomly choose one of 3 stingers to play at the front to create some variation, some randomization. So let's try this. I don't even know if this is going to work or sound correct, but whatever. We'll see what it sounds like. And it sounds very, very quiet. That's what it sounds like. So it provides a little variation there, so that it creates distraction, and there's change every single time one of these plays. Yeah. So you got that. You got one there. Got one there. This is less than exciting. This one's kind of less than exciting. This one works very well. So a stinger should be a short, sharp impact that using musical instrumentation. It should not have anything rhythmic or harmonic or melodic, because that can run the issue of clashing with the action cues. So you want to make sure that it hits really hard and then gets out of the way very quickly. Here's some other stingers. This is a bad example of a stinger, right? That's just like a short 90s orchestra hit. That one works all right. I would say that that is the most basic form of a stinger, which is like a big bass drum or kick drum and a cymbal crash. That one's more of like a sound effect. Every once in a while I'll hear sound effects. You got to watch out for that. Let's see how well these work. These work well. These are more like, if you're familiar with EDM drops, big builds and impacts with kicks and cymbal crashes and turnarounds, there should be, those are very good kind of templates for this kind of sound. They should not be a musical phrase like this. This is another bad example. So musical phrases that have rhythm and tone to them are just going to cause issue when they're played against the action cues. So something that's quick, something that has a sharp, strong impact at the front, something typically with a big bass hit or bass drop in it, something with often a cymbal crash works, and then some cool modulating sound that either kind of twists and turns or gates or stutters or there's all sorts of fun effects that you can use right along with it. So stingers, again, are there to cause distraction and create some variation in the playback of your music. Let me try some other ones here. So here is an ambient cue. This one's more like what I would consider a traditional composition, with progression and melody, rhythm, and changes throughout the cue. And then there is, here's the action cues. So you make sure that it brings up the intensity and pace of the music. So hopefully these are going to be giving you some good ideas and direction for this composition, and ways that you might head. Other ideas here. Make sure your composition matches the genre of the game. Again, it's much more of a stylistic approach than 2D platformer. We did leave 2D platformer a bit more wide open to your compositional approach to it. So this make sure you match the style and feel. Ambient and action need to transition immediately. So keeping the same rhythm, key, and similar instrumentation between both helps that process. Action transitions back to ambient after 3 seconds. You don't know when anything is going to be triggered, so watch out for timing differences. Tempo changes, time signature changes, all of that cause just rhythmic hardships in your composition. Most of the rest of that is stuff that is pretty standard. Okay, so take a look through the PDF, watch the video, play the game, start getting some compositional ideas together with the other half of our Angry Bots project. Now that you have finished out the composition we move into the sound design for this week. And it is very entertaining sound design. Lots of fun stuff in there. It's all weapons and robots and explosions and lasers and missiles. All sorts of fun, kind of interesting sound design for this game. So the approach to doing the sound design is very similar for Angry Bots as it was for 2D platformer. There's less kind of silly sounds and fun sounds that you can just do with the microphone. It's a lot more designed overall, but still got some good stuff to look forward to. So for this, we're going to set it up in much the same way that you did for 2D platformer. I would suggest that you create a brand new session in Logic or your favorite DAW, and you are going to import all of the original sounds from the game. I'm going to create one new track here. And hold on just a moment. Let me go get a copy of the game. There we go. Let's do this. All right. Here is a copy of Angry Bots. And you've already navigated to find all of the sounds and put your own music into the game. But we'll do it like this. We'll go to Show Package Contents. And we'll get a folder called Contents. And we are going to Data. We're going to Streaming Assets. And we're going to Sound Effects. Yeah, I'll just pull these. I think I backed them up at some point. So here are all of the original sound effects. And if I go into, let me do this. Pull this over here. Oops. Move this out of the way. Bring Logic back up. No? Come on, Logic. There you are. I'm going to take all of those sounds that I just found, and I'm going to pull them into a Logic session right here and drop them on a track, and I'm going to tell Logic to put them all on one track, place all files on one track. And then you would probably spend some time separating all of these out. Make your life a whole lot easier as you organize it. But then you would create a couple of tracks directly below. New tracks. And you would build on these tracks. So, like I mentioned before, you would kind of separate these out. Hello. No selection. There we go. Come on, Logic, cooperate with me. There we go. Just make some space in between each one of them so that you have some clear space to build everything and work with the session. I'm just going to switch over here and play the sounds. These are all of the sounds that you will create. There are a whole lot of explosions and doors in this game. So I would, you have access to the Westar library. You also have access to freesound.org. Those are good resources for sound effects, source sound effects to work on this project. And I would suggest that you go find a large group of sounds and bring them in and edit them all in one shot, as opposed to going one at a time. So I would go find, you know that you have quite a few explosion sounds. Flying buzzer, destroyed explosion, patrol mech, destroyed explosion, missile explosion. Figure out all of the certain types of explosion types of sounds that you need. Then go into the search engine and find the particular types of sound effects that you can use. A whole group of them, bring them back into Logic and edit them all down and create different versions for the different explosions that you might need. As opposed to saying, okay, we need an explosion, one sound, going out, finding the sound, bringing it back in, editing it, naming and bouncing it, then saying, oh, I need another explosion. Go back, find another explosion sound, bring it back in. It'll probably save you a couple of trips overall. Westar has been acting up, I guess, because of the traffic. Every once in a while, we run into a message that says maximum number of downloads has been exceeded or something like that. And it is typically reset after a couple of days, something to that effect. So if you are getting issues with Westar, there also is a new login and password that you can find. I think it was set up already when you did the looping assignment, but if not, it's in that, the new password is in that assignment, or it's on FSO. So anyway, you go out and you find your sounds. Let's go ahead and listen to all of these sounds and give a couple of suggestions on your overall approach to this. Let me make sure that everybody will be able to hear these and they won't be too loud, hopefully. Hold on. Let me check my levels. Okay. All right, no problem, Michael. Thank you. Oh, I guess not there. All right, let's see. Let's try that. Let's try this. All right. So this is called airlock door close and then airlock door open. All right, that looks like it's working. So airlock door open and close. A lot of times you can get away with the close being the reverse of the open, or at least starting with that. Often you need like a ka-chunk at the end as the door actually like closes and maybe locks. But it's a good way of taking a sound and reversing it to be able to get either the open or close that you need, because it always is often a rising pitch to go up and a downward pitch to go down. The next one here, then we have exterior rain and interior hum. Right, these are pretty long samples. Rain, just go out and find a rain loop. Interior hum is often you can look for room tone. That's a very common search term, or air conditioning, or find like an empty office or something like that. So those are longer loops. They need to be able to loop because your player could just be sitting there forever. And they're longer here, but they don't necessarily need to be, your version need to be that long. Flying buzzer destroyed explosion. Here's our first explosion. That is when you destroy the buzzer. Zap electric is when it zaps you. You hear that right at the beginning of the game. Then we have a couple of sounds for the patrol mech. This is the big RoboCop looking robot as it comes after you. This is the alert when it first notices you. Destroyed explosion. This is at least this sound is a massively huge explosion. It kind of works for the big robot. I do think it's a bit of overkill overall, but this is the destroyed explosion. Does have a cool little bit of clipping in there that works for the explosion. Patrol mech footstep 1 and 2. I think they cheat a little bit and they just put the same sound as for 1 and 2. You should probably have a little bit of difference between 1 and 2 so that you can hear like basic. It refers to like left foot, right foot as it goes back and forth. So maybe even just a little bit of pitch difference between the two will give you that variation. Missile explosion. This is when the big patrol mech shoots at you. No, that is sorry. When it sorry, that was, missile explosions when it hits a wall. Shoot missiles when it actually shoots it. So those are quite large missile sounds for the patrol mech attack. Enemy spider. This is the alert sound when it wakes up. Then we have, let's kind of move this out of the way. Destroyed explosion. That is when you destroy the enemy robot, the enemy spider. This is spider proximity. This is one very short beep. As the spider gets closer and closer to you, it beeps. The beep gets faster and faster. So by proximity, the closer you are, the faster it beeps. The game does all of that for you. You just have to provide one very short beep. If it's too long and it goes it beeps really fast in the game, then it stacks up and doesn't sound. It doesn't work too well. Enemy spider self-destruct when it's a bomb on legs. When it goes off, it has this sound. I think this is a pretty horrible explosion. It's not a very good sound for being an explosion, especially compared to the other explosions in the game. Interior door open and close. This is the close. This is the open. All of the doors in the game are all like futuristic Star Trek doors where they just walk up to them, they move automatically. So it's not, sometimes I hear like somebody grabs doorknob and wooden door opens and closes. That's not what these doors are. These are like some sort of motorized version of that. It needs to, like sliding doors. You can try servos and pneumatics, hydraulics, that kind of stuff, where you get a sort of motorized movement sound. Locked. The next one here is called locked door opening. Maybe. When you hack the computers and you can enter the doors, they automatically open for you at that point. That's just a tone for that. This is when the player gets hit. This is the player shooting the weapon. Now, something to point out with that weapon, and I'm going to look at the waveform over here. This is the player shooting. All right, so is this going to work here? Hello, fader. Okay, so that is the gunshot in the game. There are 12 shots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There are 12 bullet shots in this wave file, and your shot, it doesn't have to be a bullet, it could be a laser, it could be a whatever kind of weapon you want it to be, but you should follow that waveform, because I think it's timed to the animation of the muzzle flash in the game. There's a little bit of a light effect that kind of flashes on and off, and you should be able to time the two together. So pay attention to how that sound is set up. The last one here is called terminal hacked. This is when you stand next to the computer in the game. It, again, quote unquote, hacks it. And here, it's a very computery electronic sound. I've heard people do like a voice prompt. They can have it be a robotic voice, even almost like Siri or something like that. It just says terminal hacked. Or I've had people sound like typing on a keyboard, or again, more kind of computery electronic tone like that. Whatever you find that works the best. So all of these sounds are 16-bit 441K stereo files. You should, again, build all of your tracks and sounds in a single session on multiple tracks. Lay out all of the different wave files across the original ones across a track here. Of course, when you bounce, you will have this muted. These original sounds will never end up in your actual custom sound effects, but they're just there as a guide when you're building everything. So hopefully that gives you some good direction there for your sound design.